The laughter echoed off the stone walls of the training grounds. Lyra, the pack's only non-shifter, stood frozen as the Alpha's son circled her, his taunts carving a deeper wound than any claw. But as he moved to shove her, a low, seismic growl rolled through the compound. Everyone turned. The king's massive wolf form, a creature of shadow and silver, stood at the edge of the tree line. Its glowing eyes weren't on the future Alpha. They were locked solely on Lyra, and it was already moving toward her. In the rigid hierarchy of the Silverfang pack, to be unable to shift is to be less than nothing, a broken wolf, fit only for mockery and hard labor. Lyra had accepted this as her fate, until today, because the king's wolf, an extension of his most primal instinct, had just chosen her. And the terrifying, unanswerable question now hanging in the air was, why? For 19 years, Lyra's world had been defined by a single, immutable fact. She was a latent, a wolf who could not shift. In the Silverfang pack, this wasn't just a disability, it was a social death sentence. Latents were considered broken, their inner wolves silent or asleep, making them weaker, slower, and utterly dependent on the protection of true shifters. They held no rank, could not hold council seats, and were relegated to the most menial tasks. Lyra's place was in the archives, a dusty subterranean library deep beneath the pack house, where she catalogued centuries of treaties and territorial maps. Her only friend was Elara, a low-ranking Omega who brought her meals and whispered the latest pack gossip. The pack was ruled by Alpha Thorin, a traditionalist who viewed latents as a drain on resources. His son and heir, Kael, was worse. Arrogant and cruel, Kael saw Lyra's existence as a personal insult to the pack's strength. His favorite pastime was to corner her in the hallways, his beta friend snickering behind him, and demand she try to shift. To feel the strain, he'd say, as her human form trembled under the impossible pressure. It was a sport to him. Today had been a scheduled training assessment for the pack's young warriors. Lyra had been ordered to attend, to observe and record the results, another subtle humiliation. She stood at the very edge of the pine-ringed training grounds, tablet clutched to her chest, trying to be invisible. Kael was in the center ring, showing off. He had just forced a younger shifter into submission, his own wolf form, a massive tawny beast with arrogant eyes, standing over the cowering boy. The watching pack cheered. Then Kael's gaze swept the crowd and landed on Lyra. A nasty grin spread across his face as he shifted back to human form, not even out of breath. "What's the point of all this strength?" he called out, his voice carrying, "if we still coddle the weak among us?" He started walking toward her. The crowd's energy shifted, smelling entertainment. "Lyra, since you're here to assess, let's assess you. Let's see what a latent is really made of." Before she could protest, he was in front of her. "Go on," he sneered. "Shift. For once in your life. Try." The command, backed by his alpha hair aura, pressed down on her. Lyra's body locked, a familiar, soul-deep ache of failure rising up. She couldn't. There was nothing there to command. Her silent wolf offered no connection, no surge of power. A tear of frustration escaped before she could stop it. The crowd laughed. Kael reached out to shove her shoulder. "Useless." That's when the first growl tore through the air. It didn't come from a wolf in the ring. It came from the tree line, every head swiveled. Emerging from the deep shadows of the old-growth pines was a wolf of legend. It stood a full head taller than Kael's form, its fur a tapestry of storm-cloud gray and silver, eyes like molten mercury. This was the king's wolf. King Theron, ruler of the entire Northern Dominion, was visiting Silverfang for treaty renewals. His wolf was rarely seen, as the king preferred to conduct business in his human form. Its presence here, now, was unprecedented. The pack fell into a terrified, submissive silence, wolves and humans alike bowing their heads. But the king's wolf ignored them all. Its piercing gaze was fixed on one person, Lyra. It moved with a predator's grace, closing the distance between them. Kael stumbled backward, his bravado gone. The wolf stopped inches from Lyra, who was trembling, braced for an attack. Instead, it did something that shattered 1,000 years of pack doctrine. It dipped its massive head and nudged her hand with its muzzle. A soft, questioning whine vibrated in its chest. Then it leaned its weight against her leg, a gesture of profound protection and recognition. The message was clear to every instinct in the clearing. This one is under my guard. The shock was so absolute you could hear a pine needle drop. A moment later, the air shimmered beside the great wolf. King Theron stood there, having forced a shift so fast it left cracks in the earth at his feet. He was a man in his late 30s, with the same storm-grey eyes, his expression one of utter profound confusion. He looked from his wolf, which refused to leave Lyra's side, to the stunned, terrified face of the latent girl. His own mind, a strategic powerhouse that governed millions of acres, had no data for this. His wolf, an extension of his deepest primal soul, had acted entirely on its own. And it had chosen a broken girl. "What," Theron said, his voice dangerously quiet, cutting through the silence, "is the meaning of this?" He wasn't asking the pack, he was asking his own wolf, which only stared back at him with unwavering certainty. Then the king's gaze landed on Chaol, who was still crouched in a submissive pose. "You, explain." Chaol could only stammer. Theron's jaw tightened. He finally looked at Lyra, really looked at her, and for a fleeting second, his own human confusion was mirrored by a strange pulling sensation in his chest. Without another word to the pack, he made a decision. "Bring her," he commanded his guards, his eyes locked on Lyra. "We are returning to the lodge, now. I want answers." The walk from the training grounds to the Alpha's lodge was the longest of Lyra's life. Flanked by two of the king's stone-faced guards, she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her back, a mixture of shock, envy, and burning hatred. King Theron strode ahead, his posture rigid with suppressed turmoil. Behind them, his wolf followed, a silent, silver shadow that refused to return to him, its flank brushing against Lyra's leg as if to steady her. The message was undeniable: she was under the protection of a force even the king could not fully control. They bypassed the main greeting hall and went straight to Alpha Thorin's private study, a room of dark wood and mounted trophies. Thorin was already there, his face pale. Chaol slouched near the fireplace, trying and failing to look defiant. Theron didn't sit. He stood before the massive hearth, his back to the fire, while his wolf settled at Lyra's feet, pinning Thorin and Chaol with a warning glare. "Explain to me," Theron began, his voice deceptively calm, "the nature of this girl's latency." Alpha Thorin cleared his throat. "My king, she is a latent. A simple fact. Her parents were mid-rank warriors, but she never manifested. Her wolf is silent. She is useful only for clerical work." "Useful," Theron repeated, the word dripping with ice. "Your heir found her useful for public humiliation today." Chaol flinched. Theron's gaze turned to him. "You commanded her to shift. Why?" It was a lesson, my king," Chaol stammered, "about pack strength." "A lesson," Theron said. He finally looked at Lyra, who was doing her best to disappear into the wall. "Girl, look at me." Lyra forced her head up, meeting those storm-gray eyes. For a second, the strange pulling sensation in Theron's chest returned, a faint, insistent tug. "Have you ever shifted? Even partially? A claw? A fang?" Lyra shook her head, her voice a whisper. "No, your majesty, there's nothing there to call." Theron fell silent, studying her. His wolf whined softly, nudging her hand again. The contradiction was maddening. His wolf, the embodiment of his deepest instinct, recognized something in her. Something precious, something to be guarded, but his rational mind, and every piece of evidence, declared her a nullity. "Leave us," Theron commanded Thorin and Chaol, "all of you, except her." When the room had cleared, leaving only Lyra, the king, and his wolf, the atmosphere changed. The official pressure eased, replaced by a thick, personal bewilderment. Theron ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of agitation. "What are you?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. He ordered food and tea to be brought. He asked Lyra questions, not as a king to a subject, but as a puzzled man to a mystery. He asked about her childhood, her parents, any strange illnesses or dreams. Lyra answered haltingly, having no interesting answers to give. Her life had been one of quiet dullness and consistent failure. The only anomaly was her occasional, severe migraines during the full moon, when the pack's collective energy was at its peak, headaches so bad she would black out. Theron's eyes sharpened at this. "You feel the moon's pull." "I feel pressure," Lyra admitted. "It hurts." While they spoke, Theron's wolf remained content, its head in her lap. The king watched this, a foreign jealousy twisting inside him. His wolf was choosing her comfort over his. It was then that his head guard, Riven, entered with a sealed report. Riven's expression was grim. "My king, a dispatch from the Dominion archives, sent by fast courier the moment your situation was relayed." Theron took the report, breaking the seal. As his eyes scanned the ancient parchment and modern annotations, his face lost all its color. He slowly lowered the paper, looking at Lyra as if seeing a ghost. "It says here," Theron spoke slowly, each word measured, "that the last recorded case of a so-called latent recognized by a royal wolf was over 3 centuries ago. The subject was a female from a border pack. The royal wolf of King Arcturus claimed her as a ward, just as mine has done with you." Lyra held her breath. Theron's next words sent a chill down her spine. "The archives then classify that incident not as a latency, but as a veiling." He looked from the document to her. The historians theorized the subject wasn't wolfless. Her wolf was something else entirely. Something so powerful, or so different, that it remained veiled, hidden, to protect itself or the pack around it. And only the pure, unfiltered instinct of a royal wolf could sense the truth beneath the veil. The revelation hung in the air. Lyra wasn't broken. She might be a dormant volcano. Theron stood, pacing. This changes everything. If this is true, you are not a latent. You are an undiscovered apex, and my wolf has just declared you the most important person in this territory. Before Lyra could process this, a commotion erupted outside, shouting. The sound of a struggle. Riven drew his weapon, but the door burst open before he could reach it. It was Ilara, Lyra's Omega friend, her face bloody, being dragged by two of Alpha Thorin's enforcers. She cried out, "Lyra, they're sealing the archives. They're burning the old records." Theron was across the room in a flash, his aura exploding outwards. The enforcers were thrown back against the wall. "Explain this," he snarled. Ilara, sobbing, spat out the story. After being dismissed, Alpha Thorin and Kale hadn't gone to lick their wounds. They'd gone straight to the archives. They were terrified of what the king might find, what Lyra might truly be, and what it would mean for their authority. Their solution was to destroy the physical evidence, starting with the oldest genealogies and mythic records. They were trying to erase her history before it could be discovered. Theron's rage was a cold, terrifying thing. His wolf was on its feet, a growl rumbling that shook the foundations of the lodge. "You will return to my compound at Obsidian Peak," he said to Lyra, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are not safe here. My wolf has chosen you, and that makes you a target. We will uncover the truth of this veiling there." He turned to Riven. "Arrest Alpha Thorin and his heir for treason against the Dominion and destruction of sovereign history. Secure the archives, and bring the girl's friend." He finally looked back at Lyra, the conflict still in his eyes, but overridden by a newfound ferocious purpose. "Your life as you knew it is over. The question is no longer what you are. The question is, what will you become when whatever is inside you finally wakes up?" The journey to Obsidian Peak, the king's mountain fortress, was a blur of armored vehicles and silent tension. Lyra sat in the back of a modified SUV, Ilara clutching her hand, while King Theron sat across from them, his gaze fixed on the passing forests. His wolf, however, had refused to be separated from Lyra. It lay across the floor of the vehicle, its head resting on her feet, a living, breathing enigma. Theron would occasionally glance at it, his expression unreadable, a mixture of frustration, curiosity, and that persistent, unexplained pull in his chest. Obsidian Peak wasn't a lodge. It was a citadel, carved into the side of a jagged mountain in the Northern Dominion. It was a breathtaking blend of ancient stone and modern fortification. As they drove through the massive gates, Lyra saw wolves training on cliffsides, tech specialists monitoring banks of screens, and a quiet, lethal efficiency that made Silverfang look like a rustic playground. Here, she wasn't just the latent from a backwater pack. She was the girl who had, somehow, commandeered the king's wolf. The stares were different, not mocking but assessing, wary, and deeply curious. Theron installed Lyra and Ilara in a suite of rooms that overlooked the vast, snowy valley. They weren't prison cells, but they were guarded. "For your protection," Riven explained, his tone not unkind. "Until we understand what you are a vulnerability, and a target." The king's first order was a full medical and magical evaluation. He summoned the Dominion's head physician, a severe woman named Dr. Eris, and their head archivist, an ancient wolf named Balthazar, who had personally salvaged the burning records from Silverfang. The tests began. Blood work, genetic sequencing, magical resonance scans. Lyra endured it all, the strange machinery humming around her. During a scan designed to measure psychic connection to the moon, the pain hit a blinding white-hot migraine that dropped her to her knees. The machines in the room went haywire, screens overloading with chaotic energy signatures before shutting down completely. Dr. Aris stared, stunned. "The energy she's absorbing, it's not that she has none, it's that it's all being pulled inward into a black hole inside her, a perfect veil." Meanwhile, Balthazar worked with the charred documents saved from Silverfang. In Theron's war room, he spread out fragments of parchment and old leather-bound journals. "The veiling," Balthazar said, his voice like dry leaves. "It is referenced in pieces. It is not a random mutation. It is a survival trait. Centuries ago, during the Great Purges, wolves of certain rare bloodlines, lines deemed too powerful, too different, developed the ability to cloak their nature utterly, to appear latent. It protected them from being hunted by their own kind." He pointed a bony finger at a genealogical chart recovered from the ashes. Lyra's maternal line. It does not connect to the standard Silverfang lineage. It traces back to a splinter pack wiped off the maps 300 years ago. The Nightfang pack. Theron leaned over the chart. Nightfang. Myth. Ghost stories. Myths with a basis, Balthazar insisted. They were said to be shadows, not just warriors, but spies, assassins. Their power wasn't brute strength. It was perception, stealth, and a connection to the lunar cycle so deep they could manipulate the very shadows. They were considered dangerous heretics. And they were exterminated. The implications settled over the room. Lyra wasn't just a rare apex. She was the last remnant of a line her own people had tried to erase. Her latency was her inherited camouflage, a shield that had now, for reasons unknown, begun to fail. But the truth came with a terrifying caveat. Balthazar's face grew grave. The records also warn of the unveiling. The veil does not break gently. It is a dam holding back a lifetime of suppressed power. When it fails, the energy release can be catastrophic, uncontrolled. The last documented unveiling, the one 3 centuries ago, resulted in the spontaneous shift of the female and the incineration of the royal wolf who was guarding her. Both were killed. Theron went very still. His wolf, currently lying outside Lyra's door, had essentially attached itself to a living bomb, and he was feeling drawn to it. This was the wait. It gets worse moment. Lyra wasn't just a secret princess. She was a volatile magical artifact. Protecting her was one thing. Containing what she might become was another. Theron's priorities violently realigned. This was no longer just a personal mystery. It was a potential Dominion-level security threat. He doubled the guard on her suite and imposed a strict quarantine. No one in or out without his direct approval. Inside her gilded cage, Lyra felt a change. The migraines came more frequently, now accompanied by phantom sensations, a whisper of fur along her arms, a sharpness in her teeth when she was scared. She was changing, and the fear was paralyzing. Ilara tried to comfort her, but the Omega was just as terrified. The only constant was the King's Wolf. It would appear in her room, seeming to melt from the shadows, and its presence was the only thing that soothed the building pressure. One night, in a moment of pain and despair, Lyra buried her face in its fur. "What am I?" she whispered. The wolf simply rested its head on hers, and in her mind, for the first time, she didn't hear silence. She heard a distant, echoing howl. Theron, battling his own conflicting instincts, made a decision. He began spending hours in her suite, not as a king, but as a researcher. He brought texts. He asked her to describe every sensation. The rational part of him was gathering data on a threat. The part connected to his wolf just wanted to be near her. During one of these sessions, a particularly bad wave of pain hit Lyra. She gasped, her vision swimming. Without thinking, Theron was at her side, his hand on her back. The moment his skin touched hers, two things happened simultaneously. Lyra's pain vanished, replaced by a surge of cool, calming energy. And Theron's mind was flooded with a cascade of images not his own. He saw the archives at Silverfang from a low angle, felt the sting of Kael's mockery, smelled the pine of the training grounds. He was seeing her memories. He jerked his hand back as if burned, staring at her in shock. I saw Lyra looked up, confused. Saw what? That's when the alarms blared across Obsidian Peak. Red lights flashed, Riven's voice barked over the comms. Breach, southern perimeter. Hostiles are inside the walls. The attack wasn't from a rival pack, it was from within. A faction of traditionalist alphas from the Dominion Council, led by a hawkish elder named Vance, had been monitoring the situation. They saw Lyra not as a mystery to be solved, but as a confirmed heresy to be purged. A Nightfang remnant, coupled with the King's unstable behavior, was a threat to the natural order. They hadn't come to negotiate, they'd come to eliminate the aberration. As the sound of combat echoed through the stone corridors, Theron faced Lyra. The scholar and the strategist were gone. Only the Alpha remained. "Stay here," he commanded, his eyes flashing gold. But his wolf at Lyra's side raised its head and snarled, not at the distant threat, but at him. It refused the order. It would not leave her. In that split second, Theron understood. His wolf wasn't just protecting a secret, it was protecting its other half. The final, impossible revelation broke over King Theron. The pull he felt, the connection his wolf had sensed, it wasn't a ward or a curiosity. It was the faint, veiled echo of a mate bond. A bond with a woman whose very nature was a lie, whose awakening could destroy them both. And their enemies were now at the door. Chaos erupted inside the mountain fortress. The sound of clashing steel, snarling wolves, and shouts of combat echoed through the granite halls. Elder Vance's traditionalists, seasoned warriors all, had used inside knowledge to bypass the outer defenses. Their goal was singular: eliminate the Nightfang aberration before the king's irrational attachment doomed them all. Theron's guards, the Obsidian Guard, met them in a furious, brutal stalemate at the junction to the residential wing. Inside the suite, Theron stood between Lyra and the door, his body coiled for violence. His wolf positioned itself in front of her, a living barricade. Riven, status. Theron barked into his comm. Contained, but not for long, my king. They've brought silver-tipped weapons and a Witchbane grenade. Riven's report was grim. Witchbane would release a toxin that disrupted a wolf's connection to its beast, leaving them human and helpless. It was a weapon of cowards, designed for assassination. Lyra felt the world narrowing. The panic, the sounds of battle, the suffocating fear. It acted like a trigger. The dam inside her, the veil holding back a lifetime of power, began to splinter. A pressure so immense built in her skull that she cried out, falling to her knees. Visions assaulted her, not just her memories, but shadows moving in the corridors outside. The exact positions of Vance's men, their heartbeats like frantic drums in the dark. The heritage of the Nightfang wasn't brute force. It was perception. It was seeing the unseen. Theron turned, seeing her distress. Against all tactical sense, he knelt before her, taking her face in his hands. Look at me, Lyra, look at me. His touch, like before, became a conduit. This time, the flood went both ways. He saw the battlefield through her new, terrifying senses, and she felt the roaring, protective certainty of his wolf, and beneath it, the human man's own fierce, burgeoning claim. Mine, the instinct screamed from both of them. The mate bond, no longer a faint echo, snapped into place with the resonance of a struck bell. At that precise moment, the reinforced door to the suite buckled. A Witchbane grenade was hurled into the room, smashing on the floor. A cloud of shimmering, grey dust billowed out. Theron's wolf howled in warning, but it was too late. Theron felt his connection to his beast sever, a nauseating emptiness. He was trapped in his human form. From the cloud, Elder Vance emerged, a silver dagger in hand, his eyes fixed on Lyra. A clean end, my king, for the good of all. But the grenade had a different effect on Lyra. Instead of suppressing her power, the Witchbane interacted with her unraveling veil like a catalyst. The pain vanished. A profound, icy calm settled over her. She looked up at Vance, and her eyes were no longer human. They were pools of solid, reflective silver, like twin full moons. She didn't grow claws or fangs. The shadows in the room simply bent toward her. They pooled at her feet, then rose, forming shapes wolves of pure darkness that circled her with silent snarls. Vance froze, his certainty crumbling into primal fear. What devilry is this? Lyra spoke, her voice layered with 100 whispers. You call me heresy, I am simply what was forgotten. With a thought, the shadow wolves lunged. They didn't tear flesh. They passed through Vance and his men, and where they passed, the will to fight was extinguished. Men dropped their weapons, falling into a sudden, deep slumber. The shadow pack then streamed out the door, and the sounds of battle in the hall ceased within seconds. Silence returned to Obsidian Peak. In the suite, only Theron, Lyra, and his physical wolf remained. The wolf looked at Lyra's shadow wolves with clear recognition, then walked to her side. Theron, still human, stared at his mate. The woman he had been tasked to dissect was now a queen of shadows, having disarmed an elite force without shedding a drop of blood. The fear was gone, replaced by awe. He had spent his life conquering through visible strength. She commanded the unseen. They were perfect complements. The aftermath was swift. Elder Vance and his conspirators were stripped of their ranks and imprisoned, their fate to be decided by the full council. The attempted coup, however, had backfired spectacularly. It had publicly demonstrated Lyra's power and her restraint. She was not a mindless weapon. She was a strategic power who could neutralize a threat without massacre. This earned respect where fear had once festered. 1 week later, in the Grand Hall of Obsidian Peak, King Theron made his declaration before the assembled Dominion Alphas. Lyra stood beside him, dressed not in shadows, but in a gown of deep blue. Her eyes were back to normal, but the power hummed quietly beneath the surface, a settled, controlled tide. The era of hunting the different is over, Theron announced, his voice leaving no room for debate. Lyra of the Nightfang line is not an aberration. She is the first of a reclaimed heritage. She is my fated mate, and your Lunar Queen. He took her hand, and this time the bond flared openly for all to sense, a powerhouse of instinct and a mystery of shadow, irrevocably joined. The final surprising detail came during the integration of the captured Silverfang pack members. With Alpha Thorin and Kale in Dominion cells awaiting trial for treason and destruction of records, the pack needed new leadership. Lyra, consulting with Theron and Balthazar, made a decree. The Silverfang territory would be governed by a council, led by her friend Alara. The timid Omega, under Lyra's mentorship, revealed a sharp mind for diplomacy and fairness. It was a move that shocked traditionalists but solidified Lyra's reputation as a ruler who saw value where others saw none. Months later, peace had settled over the Dominion. Lyra's training was ongoing. She learned to control her shadows, to use them for defense, for stealth, and for healing troubled minds. Her most powerful ability, it turned out, was not attack. She could weave a new, gentle veil around pups who manifested too early or wolves traumatized by battle, giving their minds time to heal. Her disability had been a superpower in disguise all along, a capacity for protection so deep it had needed to hide until she was strong enough to wield it. On a quiet evening, Lyra and Theron stood on their balcony at Obsidian Peak, watching the northern lights dance. His arm was around her, his wolf curled contentedly at their feet, now fully their wolf, a bridge between two halves of one whole. "Do you ever miss the silence?" Theron asked softly. Lyra smiled, leaning into him. "It was never silent. I just didn't understand the language." She looked out at the stars, at the kingdom they now ruled together, a union of stark power and hidden depth. The girl mocked for being unable to shift had not only shifted the course of her own destiny, she had reshaped the very foundations of her world. And it was only the beginning. Lyra's story forces us to ask a difficult question: how often do we mistake a different kind of strength for weakness? For 19 years, her pack saw only a broken girl, a useless latent. They defined her by what she couldn't do. But the King's Wolf, operating on pure instinct, saw the truth they were all blind to. It saw the dormant power, the veiled royalty, the mate bond hidden beneath layers of protective silence. In the end, Lyra's greatest weakness was her greatest armor, and her so-called disability was the very superpower that would save a kingdom. This tale is a masterclass in dramatic inversion. The mocked outcast becomes the queen. The rational king is schooled by his own primal instinct. The disability is the power source. It reminds us that the most profound truths are often felt in the gut long before they are understood by the mind. King Theron's wolf didn't need a historical archive or a blood test. It just knew. And that knowing changed everything. From the ashes of a burned archive and the cruelty of a pack that never valued her, Lyra didn't just find her place, she forged a new one. She reclaimed a lost heritage and rewrote the rules, proving that true worth is never defined by the people too short-sighted to see it. So the next time you're quick to judge what you perceive as a flaw, remember the girl who couldn't shift and the wolf that knew she was a queen. Sometimes, the universe hides its most valuable treasures in plain sight, waiting for the right instinct to recognize them. If you were captivated by this journey of hidden power, fierce protection, and a love that defied all logic, do the channel a huge favor. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves a good underdog tale, and subscribe to the channel. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the epic stories that remind us that magic and strength come in the most unexpected forms. Thanks for watching.